Good morning, it's Wednesday, the 15th of April. I'm Marit Gwyn and you're watching Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis live here on Euronews. Coming up, Lebanon and Israel have held rare direct talks mediated by the United States. Despite both sides' conflicting demands, the aim is to secure a ceasefire in Israel's war on Hezbollah. We'll have the view from Beirut. And President Donald Trump has said the US's talks with Iran could resume within 2 days after Pakistan proposed a second round of negotiations in Islamabad. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky continues his surprise European tour today with a visit to Rome, where he will meet Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Yesterday in Germany, the Ukrainian leader signed a new defense deal with Chancellor Friedrich Merz, covering missiles, drones, and military intelligence sharing. We'll have more details on that from Berlin. But first, back to our top story, because yesterday in Washington, Secretary of State Marco Rubio hosted the Lebanese and Israeli ambassadors to the US for direct talks aimed at securing a ceasefire in Lebanon, where 2,000 people have been killed and more than 1 million displaced since the start of the war on Iran. For more on those talks in DC yesterday, we can bring in our US correspondent, Stefan Grober, who's there in the studio with us. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning, Marit.
Now, Lebanon and Israel are talking to each other directly. How significant is this?
Well, it was a big surprise for all of us. Remember, these were actually the first direct talks between both countries since 1993, talks mediated by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as you said, who had urged both sides to seize a historic opportunity for peace. Now, Lebanon, of course, wants a ceasefire. Israel wants the elimination of the Iranian, pro-Iranian Hezbollah militia in Lebanon, whose attacks on Israel have pulled the country into this conflict in the first place. Hezbollah, by the way, who is adamantly opposed to these talks, and even claimed a series of rocket attacks against Israel while these talks in Washington were going on. So it's not clear this morning whether the discussions have yielded any sizable progress. The Israeli ambassador said after the 2-hour meeting that both sides were united in liberating Lebanon from Hezbollah, but there was no Lebanese statement at all after the talk. So we have to see how things develop. They have agreed to continue their talks.
And Stefan, looking at the wider situation, the talks between the US and Iran have really stalled since last weekend, but there could be hopes that those talks could be revived.
Well, there was a lot of disappointment in the region after the U.S. pulled out of these talks, but this morning there is a slim hope with President Donald Trump suggesting that there might be something coming up in the next 2 days. Apparently, Vice President J.D. Vance is on standby to go into round 2. Of course, the main sticking point remains the Iranian uranium enrichment capability. Both sides have suggested a suspension, but they haven't agreed on a timetable. The U.S. wants 20 years, Iran wants 5 years, so a lot to talk about here. Stay tuned.
We will stay tuned, and Stefan, thank you for bringing us up to speed on that. And now, just ahead of those talks between Lebanon and Israel yesterday, our Middle East expert Sophie Claudet spoke exclusively to Amer Bissat, the Lebanese economy minister. She asked him about the Lebanese expectations for the negotiations and also about how his government is hoping to pressure Hezbollah to lay down its arms. This is what he had to say.
The number one objective at this stage is the end of hostilities and the cessation of the violence. Lebanon has paid an extremely high price and continues to pay an extremely high price, both in terms of death, injured, as well as massive displacement. We want our people, we want the 1.4 million people to go back to their lands, to their homes. We're counting on the national consensus at this point that nobody wants violence internally. And we believe strongly that through discussions, negotiations, working with all Lebanese of all sects and all religions under the premise that I just mentioned, the two-legged premise of sovereignty of the state and liberation of the South, and the hostilities, but at the same time, complete control over the decisions and taking over the arms. We are all in the same boat at this stage. And I think if we present it that way, there will be a consensus eventually on this.
The Lebanese Economy Minister, Amir Bissat, there. Joining us live now from Beirut for more on the situation in Lebanon is Rima Abdul Malak, a former French Minister for Culture, who is now Executive Director of L'Orient Le Jour, one of Lebanon's leading daily newspapers, and its English equivalent, L'Orient Today. Rima, welcome. Good morning. Great to have you on the show.
Good morning.
So can you start by describing to us the feeling there on the ground in Lebanon this morning after, I think, what is now 7 weeks of Israeli bombardment?
Yes, after 7 weeks of war, we're really exhausted, and there's a lot of anger and despair here. But we have this very slight glimmer of hope since yesterday evening with this historic moment of first step of talks. I can't even say negotiations so far because it looks like more a staging of negotiation rather than real negotiations with timelines and objectives and mediators. But still, it's such a historic occasion, and it's maybe our last chance to start on the good path for a future process leading to maybe peace and stability for the future.
Rima, you speak of a glimmer of hope, but I guess the elephant in the room in these talks is Hezbollah, because Israel's war is on that militia group, but it's negotiating with Lebanon. Does the Lebanese government have any cards to play in these talks?
Of course, but the Lebanese government needs the support of the international community. France, Europe, the Gulf countries, we need support to the army, to re-legitimate the army and give her means to undertake this long process of reducing Hezbollah's militia and transform it into a more classical political party, because Hezbollah won't disappear completely, but as a militia armed by Iran and funded by Iran, this is not our wish for the future of Lebanon anyway. So that's very clear that the Lebanese government wants also to get rid of this Iranian occupation on our ground.
And I know that you yourself fled Lebanon when you were just 10 years old, shortly after Israel occupied the south of the country. Do you fear that we could see a repeat of history here? Because we have seen Israel trying to expand what they call the buffer zone in the south.
Yeah, behind me you have old editions of L'Orient Le Jour from 1978 when Israel invaded the south. And actually Hezbollah was created in 1982 in reaction, in opposition, in resistance, as they say, to the Israeli occupation. So history told us during more than 40 years that occupation leads to extremism, leads to fanatism, leads to war and violence. So this is why we are very much concerned about what is going on now. No ceasefire, but the negotiations are starting. No guarantee that Israel will not occupy the south again. So this is really not reassuring, because if we start by the same vicious circle again, no peace is possible.
Okay, Rima Abdul Malak, thank you so much. And I know the reporters of L'Orient Le Jour are doing important work there on the ground, documenting what is happening in Lebanon. Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, moving on now, Pakistan has proposed, as we mentioned earlier, a second round of talks between the US and Iran after last weekend's negotiations in Islamabad ended in a standoff. Yesterday, our EU editor Maria Tadeo spoke to President Donald Trump's former special representative to Iran, Elliot Abrams, and started by asking him what would constitute a good deal for the US in those talks.
The president needs to get a better deal than Barack Obama got in 2015 in the JCPOA, because he has reviled that agreement, the worst agreement in world history. So he's got to get better than that. That deal put off for maybe 10 years or so the Iranian nuclear program, but it said nothing about support for proxies, and it said nothing about the ballistic missile program. So I think Iran has got to be willing to give on those, or else the president will be forced to do something more. He's got now the blockade. What he has not done, and might be a next step, would be taking an island in the Persian Gulf. But again, I think for all sorts of obvious reasons, politics, the U.S. economy, the elections in November, I don't think he wants to do that. The question, I think, is who's making decisions in Tehran, and how much flexibility do they have?
And that is a good question. So who do you think that person is? And of course, this is all playing out big time in the energy market.
Yeah, I don't think there is one person. There was in the late Supreme Leader. He could actually make a decision, one person, and make it stick. His son, who is now Supreme Leader, may even be in a coma. We don't know. Even if he is not in a coma, he's not able to enforce his rule. He's too new, too young. So I think it's probably a ruling group, a group of 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 people who sit at a table. Well, maybe they don't sit at a table because they're afraid a table will be hit by a bomb, but who talk to each other somehow and figure out how far can we go here. I think that's going to be a real problem.
Of course, there's talks now between the Israelis and the Lebanese government, too, when you talk about the proxies. What is the calculus that Israel is making?
The Israeli calculus, I think, is, look, they were attacked by Hezbollah. And the U.S. was in a war with Iran, not with Lebanon, and Hezbollah, presumably under instructions from Tehran, attacked Israel. So the Israelis are pushing back. The Lebanese government, the Lebanese army are doing nothing. So the Israelis are pushing back. On the Iran front, they will follow President Trump. That is, when he said... If
President Trump says that's a good deal, will they accept it? You believe they will accept it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And what makes you believe that?
Pardon?
What makes you believe that? There's many who think Israel will still want to continue.
Yeah, they may still want to, but they won't. They have a very close relationship with the United States under President Trump. Netanyahu and Trump have a close relationship. In the 12-day war last June, when Trump said stop, they stopped. And I think they will here, too.
We've heard now the U.S. president repeat it multiple times. NATO did not help. NATO countries say this is a defensive alliance. He keeps saying NATO and the Europeans in particular, it's a paper tiger. What ramifications in the medium term is this going to have?
On the medium term, I would take to be 3 years, meaning the Trump years. You got 3 years to go. The relationship is not going to improve much. He won't get out of NATO. I don't think he has the ability to get out of NATO legally. Under U.S. law, it takes more than a year, and you need Congress. But the relationship is clearly weakened. To me, the real question is, who is our next president, and will he try to rebuild that relationship?
Elliot Abrams there. Moving on now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is on a whistle-stop tour of European capitals. He'll be in Rome later today after visits to Germany and Norway yesterday. To debrief us on his talks with the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, we can bring in our correspondent Laura Fleischmann, who's standing by for us in a sunny Berlin this morning. Good morning, Laura. Can you start by telling us what was achieved in that surprise visit by Zelensky to Berlin yesterday?
Good morning to you too. And the main headline to come out of this visit is likely going to be the strategic partnership that Germany and Ukraine want to work on that goes well beyond military aid. There were multiple agreements signed, one on working together in defense and another one on rebuilding Ukraine's industry. And those focused on working together regarding air defense, drones and joint development projects. But this visit was truly important and significant because those were the first government consultations between Ukraine and Germany in well over 20 years. Zelensky brought a big delegation with him alongside his defense minister, and they worked together on speaking about the EU loan, the 90 billion euro loan that has been blocked by Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban. And now with the opposition winning just last weekend, Merz sees a window of opportunity opening up to release this loan, and he pushed hard on releasing it. And Zelensky, during his visit, he stated that he still wants to join the EU, he wants to join NATO. He doesn't want a light EU or light NATO membership. But let's hear it from Zelensky himself, what he actually had to say during his visit in Berlin.
We simply do not have enough money. But today we have already talked about it. And we hope that Germany, as one of the leaders of the European Union, will help us to quickly unlock 90 billion euros, and we will be able to replenish our Ukrainian products with investments. And then the total use of products on the battlefield will be even greater.
And the German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius will also host guests, including the NATO chief Mark Rutte in Berlin later today. Laura, what can we expect?
Well, today the Ukraine Defense Contact Group is coming together. It's a group consisting of well over 50 member states. They work on coordinating military aid for Ukraine. And what's likely going to be most interesting about today is that Ukraine plans on presenting its war plan on how to push Russia further towards peace. And this plan consists of three key elements. The first one is air defense, the second one drone expansion, but the third one I find most fascinating, it's data exchange. Ukraine plans on exchanging real combat data with technology and with funding, so it wants to support its supporters. And yesterday and today showed that Berlin is cementing itself as the coordination hub for European defense support to Ukraine as the US steps down and the EU steps up.
Laura in Berlin, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed there. Now, moving on to Spain now, the leader, Pedro Sánchez, has gained a reputation on the international stage for his critical stance on the wars in Gaza and Iran. But at home, he faces a tough and polarising political environment as both government and opposition face damning allegations of corruption. Jakub Janis takes a closer look.
As some of you have possibly noticed, Pedro Sánchez is positioning himself as the ultimate progressive hero, famously defying Donald Trump over the war in Iran.
Esta es la verdadera tragedia, porque lo último que necesitaba el mundo es otra guerra, y en esta ocasión una guerra ilegal.
And his international popularity seems to be rising. But at home, the Spanish Prime Minister is fighting a completely different war. A massive wave of domestic corruption scandals. So what is going on there? First, the Prime Minister's wife, Begoña Gómez, is facing now trial for influence peddling and embezzlement, accused of using her position to secure funding for her private university projects. But to make matters worse, Sánchez inner circle is collapsing. Last June, his former senior aide, Santos Cerdán, was placed in a pre-trial detention for alleged bribery. Then, in November, his former transport minister, José Luis Ábalos, and top aide, Koldo Garcia, were placed in custody over the Koldo case. Alright, but in plain English, these officials allegedly took secret cash payouts for awarding lucrative government face mask contracts during the COVID pandemic. So they might have been in the business of covering people's faces. But if these accusations prove true, they did a terrible job of covering their own tracks. And naturally, the opposition Partido Popular is demanding the Prime Minister resign immediately. However, their outrage is complicated by their own historical scandals. Most notably the kitchen case, now in trial, where the party allegedly used state police to destroy evidence of illegal financing. So how bad is the systemic rot? According to Transparency International, in recent years, Spain has suffered a significant decline. Looking at the latest EU data, Spain is placed firmly in the lower half of the 27-member bloc. They are still doing better than Italy and Poland, but they are drifting uncomfortably close to the bottom of the table, where you will find Hungary and Bulgaria. So it seems Sánchez might be standing up to Washington, but his greatest challenge is surviving Madrid.
Jakub Janis there. And that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have tips for us, you can get in touch on europetoday@euronews.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you same place, same time tomorrow morning. See you soon here on Euronews.